Hi everyone, this week we are looking at Ethnicity and Crime week 2. It may be week 3, I'm not 100% sure, I can't remember. It says week 2 on my slide though. This week we are going to look at the idea that crime can be socially constructed and how this can help us explain the ethnic differences in crime that we've discussed over the last few weeks. And we're also going to look at the idea, and it may take some time, of institutional racism and the potential impact on those crime statistics, on policing, on the criminal justice system, etc., etc. Okay, some key words that you need to write down in the back of your glossary of the unit handbook that I give you for crime and deviance, which no doubt you haven't used yet. There's 5 on there. I need you to understand these keywords and terms and understand what they mean. If you don't understand them by watching this video or from the stuff that we've done previously, do a little bit of research please, and find out what it means. Okay, so social construction of crime. Following on from what we were talking about last week, that it is how society is structured that leads to criminal activity. There's disagreement from neo-Marxists such as Paul Gilroy that actually it's more to do with how society is structured and how society views ethnic minorities, etc., that creates this idea of black criminality, and it's in the eyes of Paul Gilroy it is literally down to racist stereotypes, and that black people are no more criminal than anyone else, and that is a myth. The problem is, according to Gilroy, is that the police and the criminal justice system act upon these stereotypes, and that is the reason why we have so many within all of the processes of the policing and criminal justice system. Gilroy puts forward this idea that it links to past political struggles for black and Asian population because of the British colonies and imperialism. Back then there would be resistance against racism in their own land because they were being oppressed, so this would be in the form of riots, marches, demonstrations and things like that. The problem is that, according to Gilroy, when this racism started in this country, they reacted in the same way, but the difference being it was actually a criminal activity in our country, whereas in the imperial countries around the world it wasn't. So that's one of the reasons they reacted in exactly the same way, but it was now criminal, so it was made criminal. Lee and Young, who we discussed last week, criticised Gilroy for this because they say that the first generation of immigrants who came from these colonial areas were very law-abiding and didn't riot and didn't demonstrate against anything, and they were very law-abiding. So the idea, and if anyone was going to act in exactly the same way, it would be those first generation people, because it was very close and it was very recent to them. Also, intra-ethnic crimes, that it doesn't really help us understand this political struggle. It's not revolutionary. A crime within ethnic groups isn't revolutionary. It's a crime against people of your own. And there's nothing demonstration or anti-racist about that. And also, it doesn't really explain how Asian crime is lower than black crime. It would have to potentially explain that police would have to be selectively racist towards black people as opposed to Asians. Lee and Young see this as being quite unlikely, that they would be selectively racist. On a similar line is Hall, and the study that Hall et al. Carried out in 1979 about how they policed the crisis in the 70s. There was a crisis of capitalism in the 1970s where there was rising unemployment, there was high inflation, and police had to use force to maintain order because of rioting, because of unrest in the streets, because of industrial action and things like that. Alongside this was this supposed rise in mugging, and it's suggested by Hall that the moral panic of the 1970s with the media about this rise in mugging give them an opportunity to create scapegoats. And there was no coincidence, according to Hall et al., that this happened at the same time. Media amplified black deviance, and it took away from the real social problem, which is, that the government were letting the people of the country down. Black youths particularly were made the scapegoats because of this very low number of personable crimes, such as mugging, that was happening. And the other thing we've got to think about is, why would the government do this? Well, they're using very heavy-handed paramilitary kind of policing to try to get rid of the problem of on the streets and the riots and the dissatisfaction. They needed public support for this. They didn't want the public saying that's a really bad thing. So by making it personable and advertising this personable crime, they got people on the side. So according to Hall et al. And Gilroy, the high arrest rate is just literally down to the policing rather than real deviant acts. Downs and Rock put forward that there's inconsistency in what Hall's talking about, in that on one hand they're claiming that black street crime was not rising, but on the other hand they're saying that it was rising because of unemployment. Neither do they really show why the capitalist crisis led to a moral panic, or what the public were thinking of if they were blaming black crime on black people. Left realists also argue that inner city residents actually were fearful about mugging, and it wasn't just a panic, but it was actually realistic. And Hall et al. Don't really look at this. As we've identified, there's real ethnic differences at all stages of the process. So that's from stop and search and arrest all the way through to prison sentences. And we need to identify really why that may be the case, and whether or not there's institutional racism involved anywhere along the line. So in terms of policing, there's this idea, and it's raised by Phillips and Bowling, that there's excessive policing, it's over the top, and that ethnic minorities are being scrutinised and looked at and unfairly at the hands of over-surveilling from the police. This idea that they put forward, that it's over-policing and under-protection, so that ethnic minorities believe that they are being having the finger pointed at them, but there's no protection from violent acts, for instance, that are towards them. Okay, in terms of stop and search, and we've discussed already previously that black people are 8 times more likely than white people to be stopped and searched. The Terrorism Act of 2000 as well made it more likely for Asians to be stopped and searched under the Terrorism Act, and in fact they were 3 times more likely than anyone else to be stopped in terms of their person or their vehicles, and it didn't even need to be under reasonable suspicion. To explain this, we need to look at possible reasons for these patterns, so police racism, ethnic differences in offending, and also the demographics. The Macpherson report came out in 1999 as a result of the Stephen Lawrence case, and it was found that there was great institutional racism within the Metropolitan Police during the investigation, all the way up into the way that they were within the justice system as well. And they believe that there's great racist attitudes amongst a lot of officers as well within the actual way that it's being done. And this is followed certainly by Phillips and Bowling, who say that there's deliberate targeting from many officers due to negative stereotypes and these of ethnic minorities. And there's this canteen culture being that the stereotypes and this racist view is kind of upheld between the rank and file officers, so it goes all the way from the top all the way down, and it's discussed and laughed about within lunch breaks and changing rooms and things like that. There's an explanation possible as well in terms of the disproportionality of stop and searches is reflected just because of the differences in offending. We could look at it from a type of crime and locations part as well. If you think about why people might be stopped and searched, it's not white collar crime. So it's personable crime, it's gun crime, knives, etc. And these are going to be in working class areas. And we've already seen that there is a disproportionate amount of people of ethnic minorities within those type of areas. So that might be another reason why there is an ethnic difference. In terms of the types of stop and search as well, low discretion stop and searches are mainly where a victim has described the person, and this person is stop and search because they've been identified. Morris says that white victims are more likely to report black offenders, so there's this idea of racism outside of the police as well, but the police are picking up on it because they believe in these stereotypes. High discretion stop and searches are more kind of things that you read about in the news and you see in documentaries, etc., where police are acting without intelligence. They're driving along, they see a group of black youths, or they see some black kids in a BMW or whatever, and they'll just stop them. This is very much down to interpretation. They use the stereotypes to carry out this type of stop and search. The final of the three reasons why we might look at these patterns is demographic factors. So as we've already mentioned, there's an overrepresentation in groups of ethnic minorities within unemployed, manual workers, urban areas. So they're more likely to be stop and search because that's where they were at. Okay. So that argument kind of comes up that it's a class thing rather than an ethnicity thing. So there isn't racism. It goes against this idea that there's institutional racism. So it's about where they are rather than who they are. Once they get into the system, then there's still this idea that there's a disproportionate ethnic difference when it comes to statistics about crime. The Criminal Prosecution Service, the CPS, are the people who decide whether something goes to court. They've got to weigh up all of the evidence, etc. There's a suggestion that many are dropped because there isn't enough evidence, and this is because weak cases are brought forward by the police based on racism and stereotyping. Ethnic minority groups are more likely to go to Crown Court as opposed to Magistrates Court. Crown Court, you're more likely to get a higher sentence than you are at Magistrates Court. So there's an idea about this racism there in terms of selecting where they go because they want to give them a higher sentence. Having said that, black and Asian offenders are less likely to be found guilty than white offenders. 60% of all white offenders were found guilty, 52% of black and 44% of Asian. So again, there's a suggestion that police and the Criminal Prosecution Service might be discriminating based on race and putting forward weak cases. When it comes to custodial sentences, black offenders were given a greater proportion of custodial sentences, 68%, compared to 55 and 59 when it comes to white and Asian. So there's a reason, but why is that happening? Well, it could be the offence. It could have nothing to do with ethnicity whatsoever. It could actually be down to the offences that are being carried out. It could also be taken into consideration if they've got previous convictions. If you live in a working class area, this might not be the first time you've committed that crime, so you are more likely to do it. However, Roger Hood carried out a study that found even when those factors were taken into consideration, black men were more likely and also more likely to be given a custodial sentence, and the custodial sentence was going to be longer than those compared to a white man. Once they get into prison, making up the actual numbers in prison, so 2007 there was some data released where a quarter of ethnic minority groups made up the male prison population in the UK. 15% of those were black and 7% of those were Asian. 7.4 out of every 1,000 black person was in jail. So out of the population of all black people in the UK, per 1,000, 7.4 of them were in there. And as you can see, that's a massive difference. That's nearly 5 times more likely to be in prison than white people. They also got longer sentences, on average around about 4 years more for the same type of sentence. Ethnic minority groups are more likely to be on remand rather than be given bail to go home. And there's very similar patterns in the US where 40% of the population of prisons are black and 20% are Hispanic. Okay, 30 seconds left. For the lesson, I need you to bring your file, your notes from this video. I want you to research the Stephen Lawrence case and summarise it with those questions in mind. There's some links on the blog about where you can get some information, so it shouldn't be too hard, but try to find some other stuff. There's loads of stuff on YouTube. Add the keywords from the third slide on this PowerPoint to your glossary, as well as a description for each one. See you all in class. Bye bye.